Hello and welcome to the very first episode of No BS Photography. This is something I've wanted to do for a very long time now, and I'm finally forcing myself to do it. This is going to be a very casual series where we simply just talk everything photography. I plan to do some tutorials, some historical episodes, and just chat about some hot takes I have while showing off what I was shooting that week. Before we get into the topic of today's episode, I figured I'd just introduce myself. My name's Alex, and I've been doing photography for the better part of 6 years now. I've shot in a wide variety of professional disciplines, like shooting motorsports, college sports, some work for various companies big and small, and everything down to just portraits of my friends and some personal projects of mine, like shooting lighthouses and cemeteries around my beautiful state of Michigan. I recently graduated from college earlier this year with my bachelor's in journalism and screen studies. My goal is to land a job in the journalism field, put 10 to 15 years in while obtaining my master's degree along the way. Eventually, I want to become a professor and teach photography or photojournalism. I figured this would be a great way for me to practice teaching and helping others reach their goals in this art form as well. And that's why I started this series. These first few episodes are going to be aimed more towards beginners, and we will be discussing a very hot take I have about getting in photography. And that hot take is that you should not spend more than $100 on your first camera. Photography is an incredibly expensive hobby, and it's not something you should just go all in on. It is something I would compare to wanting to play music as a kid. Many kids dream of being a rock star when they grow up. I know I did. They begged their parents for a guitar, a drum set, a bass, whatever. They play it nonstop for a month or so, and then it just sits in the corner collecting dust. And that's exactly what learning photography is like for a lot of people. It's something I've seen so many times on social media. Someone spends all this money on a camera they don't know how to use, and then they immediately get frustrated that they aren't instantly taking amazing photos. For many people, this camera you spent so much of your money on ends up in the bag in the closet, and eventually in your local marketplace site. And this is one of the main reasons why you shouldn't spend more than $100 on your first camera. You can get a more than capable older camera for under $100. You can learn photography without any of the fancy bells and whistles that these newer models have. You'll be forced to slow down and think about your settings, your composition. You won't be able to just spray and pray like I see so many beginners do. And if in a few months you realize photography isn't for you, it's no big deal. Photography is a very tough art form. It takes tons of practice and honestly years of hard work before you start consistently taking anything good. So for a lot of people out there, they may realize they don't want to put in the work to get good. And that's totally fine. At least at that point, you're only out some change and not a giant investment. So when buying your first camera for under $100, here's a few things you should look for. Make sure you buy a camera that has an interchangeable lens mount. Make sure that camera has a mount that's still used today, like a Nikon F, Canon Ef, Pentax K mount, or a Micro Four Thirds. These are all solid options to pick from. Make sure the camera you buy has full manual controls. You'll want to make sure you can manually change the aperture, the shutter speed, and your ISO. Look for an M on the top dial of the camera. The next thing is, don't stress features, don't stress megapixels. Trust me, you're learning. You don't know what you even need. This is one of the things I see the most out of newbies. Oh, I need high FPS. Oh, I need eye autofocus. No, you don't. You do not. Trust me, you're learning. It'll be okay. You're going to thank me later on. Mirrorless cameras are totally fine, but they're pretty hard to find for under $100. There's really only one option, maybe two, that I could find that are easily found under $100 that check all of our boxes. And the very last thing is to just don't be afraid to shop online. KEH.com is one of my favorite places to buy used camera gear from. Obviously, they're not sponsoring the video. Look at how many views this has. Come on, no one's sponsoring this. Another great place to get gear is eBay. You just have to make sure you read the description beforehand. A lot of companies will sell damaged gear for parts, so just make sure you read the description clearly before you order something. And another rule of thumb is, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. There's a reason why a camera that's normally not under $100 is under $100. So just be careful about that. So a few cameras I'd recommend looking at for under $100 when you're starting off are the Canon 20D, the Pentax K200, and for mirrorless, the Olympus EPL1, and on very rare occasions, the Sony NEX3 can be found for under $100. I myself have bought one of these cameras that I have just mentioned, and I'm going to be using this camera going forward on every beginner's episode to show you that you can get a more than capable camera for under $100 that will handle literally anything you want to shoot. And that camera that I've purchased and I would personally recommend the most is the Canon 20D. This DSLR was released in 2004 at a retail price of $1,400. It features an APS-C crop sensor, which is common among most entry-level cameras. The best part of this camera, however, is the lens mount. And that lens mount is the Canon Ef Mount. This is a great option as this camera can accept both Canon EF lenses and Canon EF lenses. Now the difference is very simple. EF lenses are made specifically for APS-C sensors. EF lenses are made specifically for full-frame sensors. The reason why you can use EF lenses on an EF camera is because the sensor coverage, obviously a full-frame sensor is much bigger than an APS-C sensor. So it will be able to mount onto that camera, you're just going to have a crop factor. And that crop factor is generally 1.5 times. So if you use a 50mm EF lens on an EFS camera, you're effectively going to have a 75mm lens on that APS-C camera like your 20D. And because a full-frame sensor is larger than an APS-C sensor, that is why you cannot use APS-C or EFS lenses on a full-frame or EF mount camera. You can mount it, and it will mount, it will work. However, you're going to have this horrible vignetting. You're going to have this dark circle around your image, and that's because you're not getting full sensor coverage out of the lens. So that's why you shouldn't use those lenses on that camera unless you're trying to go for that weird artistic approach. I don't know. Anything that offers the Canon EF mount, though, is an absolute huge selling point. So the Canon EF mount may be the most popular lens mount in the entire world. So the Canon EF lens lineup released in 1987. Canon claims to have produced its 100 millionth lens and EF mount on April 22nd of 2014. And this isn't even accounting for third-party lenses. So you'll have absolutely no problem finding lenses for this camera. And you'll have absolutely no problem finding cheap lenses for this camera. And if you decide after a few months, a year, whatever it is, that you want to pursue photography further, all you're going to have to do is just swap out your camera body and keep your lenses. I would recommend that any extra lenses you buy, or if the camera you decide to buy doesn't come with lenses, that you just buy full frame lenses. It's just going to save you money later on if and when you do decide to upgrade. So for my Canon 20D, I was able to pick mine up for $35 on eBay. It came with a kit lens. I then invested another $40 on a telephoto lens, a new battery, and a compact flash card. This brought my total investment to $75. And now you may be thinking, at a budget of $75, there's no way a camera like this that's 17 years old now can still hold up today. And now, of course, when you compare this camera to one of my modern Sony Alpha cameras, there's a huge difference in quality when it comes to blowing up images and printing. But for the vast majority of you, you're just going to be posting photos on Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And for this application, the 8.2 megapixel sensor found in the Canon 20D is going to be more than capable of this task. The only thing you really have to be careful of with this camera is the shadows. The 8.2 megapixel sensor can add a lot of noise to your shadows, even at a lower ISO. This is something that has been greatly improved in modern cameras, but you're going to find this camera more than capable nonetheless. I really wanted to drive home the point that this camera can handle any genre of photography you can throw at it. That's why I took it with me to Drift Indy's No Star Bash. This is a motorsports festival out here in the Midwest that features car shows, drifting, and just awesome car culture. I was given track access with my camera and was really able to push this thing to its absolute limits. So all these photos that have been posted here were taken on this camera, and I don't know about you, but I think these are more than good enough to post on social media. And I honestly believe that if I had posted these without saying that these were shot on a sub $100 camera, that you would never know. This is an absolute unit of a camera that'll be the perfect companion for any newbie wishing to get into the field of photography. This is a great tool that'll surely push you to learn proper techniques. It's going to push you down a route that I wish I'd taken starting off. I was like many other newer photographers out there, and I started off on a flagship Sony camera, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I would be shooting everything wide open, no matter the subject matter, just spraying and praying, and of course trying to over-edit everything in Lightroom because I shot on Sony, so naturally I shot everything 20,000 stops underexposed, and I would just try and over-edit it to all hell to try and get a usable image. And it's just something I wish I could go back in time and tell myself, don't do this. Buy a cheaper camera, actually learn what you're doing, and then get something better when you actually know it, and you can actually utilize that camera that has all these fancy bells and whistles to what you want to shoot. When you actually learn what you're doing and you can actually operate this tools to its full potential, then it makes sense to buy a much more expensive camera. So I really hope you enjoyed this hot take on the very first episode of No BS Photography. And if you're looking to learn photography, are open to learning some alternative methods, and are looking to push yourself, then No BS Photography might be the channel for you. I once again would highly recommend the Canon 20D starting off. You can find these all day online for under $100, and EF lenses can be had for so cheap that most local camera stores have bargain bins full of them. In the coming episodes, I'll be going over the basic functions of the Canon 20D to get you going. I'll be talking about the Sunny 16 rule and how to use it to get yourself in the ballpark for properly exposing an image. I will explain how to understand your camera's meter, and I will touch on the basics of composing your first image. And now I wouldn't be practicing teaching if I didn't have homework for you. For this episode, I want you to comment down below what you want to take photos of and something you want to learn about photography. I will do my absolute best to incorporate these in the future episodes. Please bear with me as well as I get the hang of this whole podcast voiceover thing. I'm working out a few kinks to get this all sorted out, and I'll have it up and running smooth as soon as I possibly can. If you like this episode and want to follow along with the series, be sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. You know how it is. And we'll see you next time for another episode of No BS Photography.